Hey, good morning, everybody. Nice to see you this morning. I see we have some questions here. Um, Whoops, what am I hearing? Whoops, hang on. I'm hearing myself. Scary. Okay, so I am going to talk about Brian's question today in the context of a question Tess sent me last week. So I know that for some reason, and maybe if somebody can tell me how to keep the chat um, like when when we finish with the session, typically the chat just disappears. So it would be great if it could stay, um, even after the session. Maybe there's a way to do that. Maybe there isn't. I don't know. In any case, so that's what we'll be discussing today in the context of something called Shempa, or so-called attachment. So, so welcome. Um, Again, thank you for joining today. And I'm going to begin by just settling in, getting mind and body in the same place, bringing our awareness to bear. Pardon me. Samba Sangarab Shiri Sambhama Karajibani Shuna Susunabun Saso Kater Swabit. Omi Chicken keep Rajani to Sung Sage Kungame one year and some sugar is not to Seba. So when I may shop loss who what so we're going to begin with our bodhicitta motivation. So bodhicitta is a Sanskrit word. Bodhi means awakened or enlightened. Citta means the mind and heart together. So that's the etymology of the word. The definition is the wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all mother sentient beings. Pardon me, I'm going to just mute so I can call Pam. Okay, hi Tim. Um, so bodhicitta is that wish to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And that means that everything we do on this path, we try to make benefiting others our reason for doing it. And usually that's not a reason for doing it, but that's fine. That's perfectly fine. We're only human, but just we can change that motivation into bodhicitta. And I do want to say that bodhicitta includes oneself. We want to attain enlightenment also for ourselves, and we recognize our own suffering, and we want, out of compassion for ourselves, to be free of suffering. So it's called the twofold goal, meaning the enlightenment of oneself and the enlightenment of others. So if that doesn't make much sense to you, or doesn't resonate with you for whatever reason, that's totally fine. If you could just think, may the time we spent together this morning benefit not only myself, but others as well. So please take just a moment to form that motivation. Okay, so as I said, Brian asked the question, how to deal with performance anxiety in formal practice. So this is a really common problem that practitioners have. And as I said last week, Tess asked about this subject of Sempa. So I'm going to discuss that this morning, pardon me, uh, in the context of, or riffing off of Pema Chodron's article, How We Get Hooked and How We Get Unhooked. she has a book, I think, with this same kind of subject called Getting Unstuck. Anyway, she's a wonderful teacher. If you don't know her, it's Pema, P-E-M-A, Children, Chodron. She's an American nun who has been teaching around the world for decades upon decades, and she's wonderful. So recommend her. Any books, any talks that she's given are reliable and interesting. So I will be using her article from the Shambhala Sun as a jumping off point for discussing this topic. So she says in her first paragraph here, Shempa is spelled S-H-E-N like Nancy, P like Paul, A, Shempa. Shempa is the urge, the hook that triggers our habitual tendencies to close down. We get hooked in that moment of tightening when we reach for relief. To get unhooked, we begin by recognizing the moment of unease and learn to relax in that moment. So the Tibetan word for this is, as I said, Shimpa, but they translate it. So I often talk about different, pardon me, different slightly problematic or greatly problematic translations from the Tibetan or Sanskrit into English. And the word attachment is on that list of kind of maybe not the best word to use, but it is the word that has been used for decades now. So we're just going to use that word. But when we think of attachment, the connotation for us is typically, a kind of grasping. We're attached to a person or we're attached to our belongings, and it's kind of an outward thing. And we don't necessarily see it as something negative, right? Um, but the thing is, this word attachment, uh, or let's say the word shempa, which has been translated as attachment, has a much, much wider and more varied um, level of understanding. So when we talk about shempa or attachment in the uh, um, sort of most profound sense in the teachings, they talk about attachment to the self. Okay. And we understand that without examination, without education, we understand that as attached to myself, like egotism, right? Attached to myself. But that's not what it is. That's not what they mean, actually, which like is kind of surprising when you spend 20 years thinking that's what it means. And then you find out, oh, it's not what it means, right? So what that means is attachment to the idea of a truly existent self. It's quite different, right? It's a really different understanding than attachment to the self. Okay. So that's one use of the word attachment. Another understanding is, and this is more along the lines of what Pema Chodron is talking about in this article, which, by the way, you can find online. Just search words would be Sempa. Really, it'll come up if you just put that in the search bar. But so there's this kind of attachment, like she calls it, like getting hooked. Okay, so we are going through our lives and we are perceiving various things and we're interacting with people and ourselves and, various situations and so forth, right? And in this case, getting hooked is like no longer being present with what's happening. Okay. So typically in very kind of broad strokes, okay, we have three kind of reactions to things. Okay. One is uh, attraction. So like we want that, right? Sort of grasping attraction, um, attachment in that sense, right? The other is aversion. So we're pushing something away. And the third is like, don't care. I couldn't care less. these three things, it's very interesting to kind of just try to observe that in our day-to-day life, because if we think about, and I speak about this often, I spoke about it probably last week when we were talking about compassion, um, about how we categorize people, right? People who do what we want, who we agree with in various ways, who serve us in some way, uh, are those that we love or like, right? Those that don't do that, who harm us, who we disagree with, who don't do what we want, we dislike them or hate them, and everyone else, I don't care. You have nothing to do with me, right? So it's a very kind of self-centered approach. But it applies to everything, I like these, you know, AirPods, or, I like this water bottle, right? Or I don't, right? Or I don't care about it. It's kind of everything. So the issue with that is that when we are perceiving something, um, as soon as we get hooked by one of those three um, judgments, let's say, then we're no longer in reality, in a sense, okay? Because we're bringing our prejudices to bear. We're bringing from we're bringing things from the past into the present that may or may not have anything to do with the present, right? We um, we judge in this sort of non-emotional way, right? Everything that we come in contact with, okay? And from our perspective, we're always right, okay? Um, Chocolate cake is, objectively delicious, okay? We might think that chocolate cake is objectively delicious, but there are people who don't like chocolate cake, like especially people who don't have a lot of contact with chocolate, like Tibetans, Indians, people like that. They don't have a lot of contact with chocolate, so they're not really, they don't care about it. But for them, whatever, Tibetans really like butter tea, which Westerners often find really disgusting. It's just like tea with butter in it and salt, and it's kind of more like a soup. But they're crazy about that. But for us, it's for most Westerners, it's like, well, no, I don't want that. So the chocolate cake, is not inherently delicious. It's our judgment of it based on previous experiences that we get hooked into. That thing is delicious. Chocolate cake is delicious, right? But it's just chocolate cake. It's our judgment on that. And then we're sort of not in the present anymore. We're bringing up, the chocolate cake our mother made for us, or the chocolate cake we had on our wedding anniversary, or whatever it is. We're not there. We're not there with what's actually happening. Okay. So you might think, well, what's the big deal? Who cares whether I like chocolate cake if somebody else doesn't like chocolate cake? It's not about that. It's about how we are actually perceiving the world, and how we get stuck, and how that being stuck causes us to suffer. Okay, that's the issue here. All right. Um, so she says, like, Tibetan word for this, the Shempa, is usually translated as attachment, but a more descriptive translation might be hooked, right? So she says, like, she says, it's kind of like a sticky feeling, and that it's an everyday experience. So it's not like a huge thing, right? It's something we experience every day, just as we go through our life, but it's really worth noticing because it's quite important, okay? So she said, even a spot on your new sweater can take you there. At the subtlest level, we feel a tightening, a tensing, a sense of closing, pardon me, a sense of closing down. Then we feel a sense of withdrawing, not wanting to be where we are. That's the hooked quality. Okay. And that can take us into blame, self denigration, anger, jealousy, and other emotions in which lead to words and actions that end up poisoning us. That's the issue. All right. So we're looking at, like, this is something that is I find endlessly interesting and useful, so practical in the Buddhist path is, you know, there these layers of subtlety. Okay. Like, yes, of course, we, like any other kind of religious system or moral system, uh, we have those same kind of rules, right? Or not rules, but dictum, like just don't kill, don't harm others, don't lie, all this kind of stuff, right? And we're still trying to, you know, follow that golden rule, right? But like that's not enough. Yeah. If we don't go deeper into like what is causing that, what is causing us to feel angry, what is causing us to feel jealous, what is causing us to, you know, um, just rage out or be greedy or whatever it is, then those things never stop. We can try to push that down all we want. We can try to force ourselves to be a certain way, but unless we're dealing with that, the root of that, those things are going to keep arising. And that's what this whole Shempa thing is about, getting to the root of these things and working with that. And then if we're working with that, these other things will naturally just fall in line. Okay. So just going down here. So we want things to be stable. Like this is also another very kind of interesting point is wanting things to be predictable and like solid, and like we want solid ground and we don't want things to change. And this causes a lot of Shempa. Shempa's all over that, right? We have all these expectations of how our life should be, of how the world should be, about our house should be, about how our body should be, how our mind should be, how our practice should be, right? And that's going to trip us up all the time. So going to Brian's question about, practicing, right? Yes, there is kind of an ideal. Yeah, there's this ideal that uh, when we sit down to do our formal practice, we're just overflowing with compassion and love and bodhicitta motivation, and we're like joyful and we're so clear about what we're going to do. And the moment we start to meditate, we're in like perfect samadhi and just concentrated, and everything's great, and then we end with this perfect dedication. Yes, that would be wonderful. Okay, that doesn't happen very often. All right, if ever. And the point of practice is to understand that and accept that, yes, that is kind of the ideal, but we're not there yet. And the way to get there is failure. The way to get there is to try and fall and try and fall and try and fall and try and fall. That's the way we get there, right? If we were already there, like all what I just described is someone who's already there. If we're already there, we wouldn't have to practice, right? Because we would just be there. We're there. Okay. So the fact that we call it practice is important, right? We're practicing to get there. And the problem that comes when we're clinging or when we're hooked on how we think things should be is that we by doing so, we kind of remove ourselves from what is happening right now, and we get tangled up in our expectations, right? And like if we are falling into this feeling of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing this well enough, I keep making mistakes, I keep falling, all of that. If we um, start to cling on to that, then what's going to happen is we're going to start to hate our practice. We're going to stop practicing because we hate it. Yeah. Because it just becomes this negative experience. And we're kind of externalizing a process that really should be internal. Okay. So let's just see what she says about this. Um, right. So she says here, in practicing with Shimpa, she says, first, sorry, my nose, first we try to recognize it, just to recognize it. And the best place to do this is on the meditation cushion. Okay. We're not going to, well, I mean, we could, I guess, just walking around doing laundry or whatever, we could like recognize Shimpa. But it's so much easier if we're actually just sitting and watching the mind and there's no other big distractions around, right? Then we're going to be able to notice that subtle shift much easier in the meditation. Okay. So she says, sitting practice teaches us how to open and relax to whatever arises without picking and choosing. Yeah. So we do this by not following after the thoughts and learning to come back to the present moment. We learn to stay with the uneasiness, right? So we're doing sitting meditation, right? And the aim is to just keep the awareness and the cessation of the breath coming in and out of the nose, keep that continuous awareness. And then we're just letting the thoughts come and go, right? So a thought arises, dwells, disappears. Another thought arises, dwells, disappears. And we see that, we notice that, but we're mainly focusing on that sensation of the breath. Okay. So in that process, we are making sure or trying our best to not judge anything, to not judge the thoughts, to not judge ourselves. So by not judging the thoughts, what I mean by that is, we can be very surprised sometimes about the thoughts that arise while we're meditating. Normally, there's so much chatter in the mind, right? It's just as we're going through our day, and things are sometimes seem very connected. Sometimes things seem very disjointed, right? And we just are. So sometimes a thought might arise, like we think that's a terrible thought. We might think like, oh, I would like to run over my neighbor with the car. I just hit them so much. Oh, you can be really shocked. Oh my God, why I have such a bad thought? That's terrible. No, it's just a thought. We just let that thought go. And we might have, the next thought might be, I like lemon cookies. And we let that thought go. Both of those thoughts, in the context of meditation, both of those thoughts have the same weight, have the same value, meaning they're valueless. They're just thoughts. Okay. Or conversely, you might have a really good thought. Oh, I just so look forward to the day that I can benefit countless beings. That's also just a thought. Okay. We also let that thought go. And we might, so we're sitting with whatever's happening in our mind, and we're sitting with whatever's happening in our body too. So, like, unless we have an injury of some kind or the pain is very intense, we should just ideally just be with whatever's happening. If we have an itch, or if we're slightly uncomfortable, or we notice it's a little hot or we're a little cold, we just be with that, relax into that. Okay. Um, so, right. Um, we train in sitting still with our desire to scratch, she says. This is how we learn to stop the chain reaction of habitual patterns that otherwise will rule our lives. Okay. Then she says, yet even in meditation, we experience Shempa. And that's exactly what Brian is talking about, whether he realized that's the question or not. Okay. So she says, like, oh, let's say that in meditation you feel settled and open, and the thoughts came and went, but they didn't hook you. They were like clouds in the sky that dissolved when you acknowledged them, etc. Right? After that, you're hooked on that very pleasant experience. I did it right. I got it right. Yeah. That's how it should always be. That's the model, right? Getting caught like that, she says, getting caught like that builds arrogance. And conversely, it builds poverty because your next session is nothing like that. Yeah. In fact, your so-called bad session is even worse now because you're hooked on the so-called good one. You sat there, she says, and you were discursive. You were obsessing about something at home, at work. You worried and you fretted. You got caught up in fear or anger. At the end of the session, you feel discouraged. You say it was bad and there's only you to blame. Okay. Right? I think anybody who's tried to practice for any length of time is very familiar with that process, right? So she says, is there something inherently wrong or right with either meditation experience? He says, only the Shempa. That's it. The Shempa we feel towards quote unquote good meditation hooks us into how it's quote unquote supposed to be. And that sets us up for Shempa towards how it's not supposed to be. Yet the meditation is just what it is. Yeah. Meditation is just what it is. You hear over and over again the teachers saying there's no good meditation, there's no bad meditation. And that can seem hard to understand and also very frustrating because your sort of impulses say, of course there's good meditation, of course there's bad meditation. What are you talking about? Right? She says we get caught in our idea of it, and our idea of what it's supposed to be, right? And that's the Shempa. That stickiness is the root Shempa. I'm reading still from her. We call it ego clinging or self-absorption, where we get hooked on the idea of good experience. Self-absorption gets stronger. When we're hooked on the idea of bad experience, self-absorption also gets stronger. This is why, as practitioners, we are taught not to judge ourselves, not to get caught in good or bad. Okay? What we really need to do is address things just as they are. So this point here is extremely important, yeah? And that is the answer to why the lamas will say no good meditation, no bad meditation, it's just meditation. You'll see particularly Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche says this kind of thing quite a lot. He says, like, were you distracted the entire session? And did you know you were distracted the entire session? That's meditation. You were aware of your distraction. You knew you were distracted. That's meditation. We're just noticing what's happening in the mind, right? And yes, of course, we're going to go galloping off into the galaxy, a lot of the times when we're trying to practice. Or we're going to understand, intellectually, like I should feel like this. I should be really joyful. I should have compassion. I should be, disciplined and all that. But I'm not, and I can't, and I'm the worst, Doesn't matter. You sit anyway. Sit anyway. Sit with your crappy mind. Sit with your undiscipline. Sit with your stupidity. Sit with your self-judgment. Sit with all the ways you should be, but you're not. Sit with that. This is what the lamas are talking about when they say like nothing special, nothing to gain, nothing to lose, nowhere to go, nowhere to be, no one to be. Do you see what I mean? And this is something we have to, in order to fully understand it, in order to kind of get free of that, we have to pay attention to this. And we just have to keep going. Yeah. If we are, and this is why also I brought up at the beginning, like we need to have compassion for ourselves too. Because this kind of thought of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing this well, I should be doing better. It's like used is too strong of a word, but it's kind of self-abuse, you know. It's self-criticism in a way that we would never do to somebody else. Yeah. So we need to kind of find our balance, right? This is not to say don't try, you know, or you don't have to try to progress, or you don't have to try to get better or whatever. No, it's not saying that. It's just saying that we need to work with the root, yeah, and that we need to kind of catch ourselves, right? When we start to feel that self-judgment of like, ugh, you know, I'm not really doing this good enough. And I keep trying, you know, and I just feel like I'm banging my head against the wall for like no reason, you know. And so I'm just going to give up, you know, screw this. I can't do it. I'm the worst. I can't do it. This is not helpful, man. And I say that from true experience, deep and long-standing experience of being like that myself, you know. So I understand the pain of that. Um, and I understand the the skillfulness of letting that go, right? And understanding that as long as we are doing our best, that is what we should be doing. So I spoke about this, I think, in one of my classes before. And it's an issue of like, you know, one of our teachers gave us this commitment to do 10 malas of the Vajraguru mantra, which is Om Hum Vajraguru Pema Siddhi Hum, to do 10 malas of those every day. Okay. And when he gave, this is Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche who gave us this instruction. And when he gave us this instruction, he was very firm on this, you know, and very much like, don't, nobody can say, because it really should only take about 15 minutes to do 10 malas, because it's a pretty short mantra, especially when you might probably take longer in the beginning until you memorize it and kind of get used to saying it. But let's say 15 minutes, you know, he's like, nobody can say they don't have 15 minutes. Just do it. He was like that. Nobody has that. And he's right. Nobody can say they don't have 15 minutes. I mean, it's true. But that doesn't mean that, and this is me talking, not him, okay? But what I want to say to that is if like, there are going to be days that, yes, we can't say we didn't have 15 minutes. Yeah, of course we have 15 minutes. But I don't know, we left it to the end of the day and we were too exhausted, or we have a certain feeling of resistance to the practice altogether, or, you know, we just don't want to, you know, we get into this kind of childish temper tantrum kind of attitude that we can have sometimes towards the practice, right? And then we only can do one mala, or that day we only do 5 malas, you know, or whatever. If that day you only do 5 malas and that's the best you can do, that's good. You did your best. Do you see what I mean? That's important to think about. And we're the only one who can find that balance and kind of keep that balance, right? Because on one hand, this is not an instruction or an invitation to just lay around all day and, you know, whatever, watch TV, right? So, I mean, we want to make some effort if we want to progress in anything, whether it's learning how to swim or how to paint or, you know, develop some kind of skill. We have to stretch ourselves a little bit, right? We have to try. So there has to be that effort. On the other hand, if we put too much stress on ourselves and we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves and we beat ourselves up for not being perfect, that's the other end of the spectrum. And that also is something we need to just dial it back. So we want to maintain that kind of middle path, right? Between not caring at all, kind of, and sort of caring too much. Okay. It's not that we don't care, it's what is actually skillful. Okay. So beating ourselves up is never going to be skillful. I promise you, it is never skillful. Okay. It's never skillful. It just isn't. So we have decided we want to reach a goal. And in order to reach this goal, kind of paradoxically in our society of no pain, no gain, in order to reach this goal, we need to be gentle with ourselves. And we need to just be kind to ourselves and understanding of ourselves like we are with our friends and loved ones, and just be like, you know what? I wish, I could have done 10 miles a day. I really want to do 10 miles a day, but I just couldn't for whatever reason today. I just couldn't, and I feel bad about that. And I wish it was different, but you know what? It's okay. And tomorrow I'll do better. Then we let it go. Then tomorrow we will actually be able to practice. If on the other hand, we're like, oh, I can't believe I only did 5 miles today. I should have done 10. What an idiot. Jigme Rinpoche said himself, everybody has 15 minutes. How do I not have 15 minutes? Blah, 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 blah. Then tomorrow we're just being like, ugh, why should I even try? I'm the worst. You see the difference? So we have a tendency to think like, yeah, no pain, no gain. This is how we tend to think. We have to beat ourselves. We have to push ourselves. We have to, whatever, lift the heaviest weight we can possibly lift until our arms shake, like, no, this is not the Buddhist way. Okay. Because it's not skillful. There's not any kind of judgment. It's just that it's not skillful. The more skillful way is to understand that sometimes the easier way is the best way. And we're not usually used to that way of thinking. So the example that I usually use is like yoga, right? Most people have taken yoga or at least familiar with yoga, okay? And in yoga, you're taught never to extend beyond what is comfortable. Yeah. Let's say you're meant to do, put your head to your knees on the floor, okay? The yoga teacher is going to say go as far as you can and hold it there, and then maybe take a couple breaths and try to go a little further, and like that. It's very gradual, very gentle. She's not walking around the room pushing people's backs down and going, but that's what we do to ourselves, and then we get injured. We do that in yoga. We get injured, right? And we injure ourselves. We injure our psyche by having this attitude. So we can practice not being judgmental of ourselves during the practice. Okay. And that is done by compassion towards ourselves. That is done by understanding the skillfulness of that attitude. That is done by accepting whatever situation we're in at that moment and just resting in that rather than struggling with everything, trying to force everything. Okay. That's the thing that's going to really help us, even if it seems like the opposite of kind of what we want to do. Okay. I think this issue is uniquely Western. I just don't think Tibetans or maybe Asians and I mean, shouldn't say that. Maybe Tibetans, I can say. So, um, uh, right. Got an ego claim, da da da. So, what we really need to do is address things as just as they are. Learning to recognize Shempa teaches us the meaning of not being attached to this world, not being attached has nothing to do with this world. It has to do with Shempa, being hooked by what we associate with comfort. All we're trying to do is not feel our uneasiness. But when we do this, we never get to the root of the practice. The root is experiencing the itch as well as the urge to scratch, then not acting out. Okay. If we're willing to practice this way over time, wisdom becomes a stronger force than Shempa, she says. That in itself has the power to has the power to stop this chain reaction. Okay. So she also then talks about kind of how we might see that. Let's say that, we're in meditation or we're in our day-to-day life and we see that Champa arising, we see that grasping, that we're getting hooked, we're getting drawn into this big storyline, okay? With practice, we'll be able to just let that go very easily, but that takes practice. There are plenty of times when, at the beginning, when we start to do this, where we can't do anything about it. We're just stuck in that, and we're kind of watching ourselves from a distance, going, "What are you doing? Stop it!" But you just can't stop it. That's okay. That's part of the process, right? But she says here, and I think this is very wise, there's something we can do after the fact, which is to go and sit on the meditation cushion and rerun the story, right? So she says, maybe we start with remembering the all worked up feeling and get in touch with that. We look clearly at the Shempa in retrospect. This is very helpful. It's also helpful to see Shempa arising in little ways where the hook is not so sharp. So she says she has a lot to say about that, and we're out of time. But the trick is to keep seeing, she says. Don't let the softening and humility turn into self-denigration. That's just another hook. Okay, that's an important point when we're talking about our practice and how we feel like we're not doing it good enough. That's also just a hook. Yeah. And a self-denigration is a hook. Self-judgment is a hook. Judging others is a hook. And you'll notice in meditation, if you work with this, being free of self-judgment becomes much easier to be free of judging others as well, which is a really interesting point. And that goes to, nothing to do with this really, but when you see someone who's very judgmental, who's like very critical of others, really have compassion for that person. You don't have to hang out with them. You don't have to be their best friend, but at least have compassion for them, because I promise you, as judgmental as they are of others, they're 100 times more judgmental of themselves, and it's torturous. Okay. Then finally, she says, as we practice this way, we gain confidence in our own wisdom. So this is something that is part of the larger goal as well, right? Our basic goodness, our Buddha nature, our inner guru, whatever, they have different words for it. But we're accessing our own wisdom, our own like innate wisdom, our innate compassion that's already there. Yeah. And when we talk about like having a teacher or a guru or whatever, that whole purpose of that is to help us to recognize or to get in touch with our innate wisdom, our own enlightened nature. Okay. All right. So let's do some meditation now. Okay. So we're just going to do a mindfulness of breathing practice. And I encourage you in this practice to do the practice as described. Okay. We take the meditation posture, which I'll explain in a second, and then notice the sensation of the breath. Try to keep our mind on the breath. Try to let the thoughts come and go. When we get distracted, we bring the mind back. That's the process, okay? So, but what I would like you to notice within that process is when you're getting hooked on anything. Wow, this is really great. Wow, this is really terrible. Oh, I can't believe I can't do this. Oh, I'm doing great. All of that is getting, all of that is Shempa, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. We're not saying to judge the Shempa either, but just trying to notice it, because that is the first step, okay? All right. So meditation posture, if you're sitting in a chair, you just want your feet flat on the floor. You're sitting on the floor or on your bed, whatever. Just cross your legs in whatever way is comfortable for you. And all the other instructions are the same, okay? So you want your hands either palms down on your knees or on your thighs, or palms on top of each other like that in your lap, or with your fingers touching and your thumbs touching like that in your lap, whatever you find most comfortable. Back is straight, but relaxed. Spine being straight is the main thing of this. Okay. Back of the neck is also straight. Chin is going to be tucked in a little bit. Arms are relaxed. Shoulders are back a little bit. It's going to open up your chest. Mouth is closed but relaxed. Tongue resting on the roof of the mouth. Breathing through the nose. Ideally, your eyes are open, looking down in front of you a few feet. Just a relaxed, lowered, unfocused gaze. Posture is the way that it is because it supports the mind in meditation. Okay? So please take a moment to notice the sensation of the breath coming in and out of the nose. So you're just paying attention to the into the nostrils. Take a moment to do that first, please. Okay. So, as I said, what we want to do is the aim is to maintain a continuous, relaxed awareness of that sensation. Okay, that's the focus of our concentration. Letting the thoughts come and go, not trying to stop thinking. Okay, just let the thoughts come and go without running after them. Thought will arise, dwell, or disappear on its own, replaced by another thought, does the same thing, rise, dwell, disappear, like clouds in the sky. Okay? When you get distracted, as soon as you notice that, oops, I got distracted, no judgment. Oh, I got distracted. Okay. Bring the mind back to the breath. So let's begin there. Begin now, please. Now begin to count the breaths, counting either every in breath or every out breath for a total of 10 complete breaths. Counting helps us to realize more quickly when we've gotten distracted because we'll lose count. So if you do lose count, don't make a big deal about it. Just as soon as you realize, oops, I got distracted, I lost count, just bring the mind back and start again at 1. You get to 10 without losing count. Don't get too attached to that either. Just, oh, cool, I made it to 10. And go back to 1 and start again. Okay, so please begin that now. Excuse me. Okay, we end the meditation now. And then we're going to go into I'm going to say the closing prayers. There's a link in the description box for them if you'd like to download them. But I will share the screen with you just in case you haven't had a time to do that. Pardon me. So we are beginning with the long life prayers for our teachers. Let me share here. Hold on 1 second, please. Ganre wawe kowe shinkam su pandan de wa manu chuweni chene si wan ten singam so ye sabe ge ga ba tu ten gyu shi. Then the one below. Om swasti jigme kempe kavong yam paru kunkav se shen su se pum dawa nitra dan sa nam ke no bang se che gya we sha king tan su so. Om swasti se la kim so chen la ten jun lei un sin dak se kyu chu pema wang sang sum na dre ga po te pen nei na chen ten de she ten tai ge shou. Lama Gungam Sambo Soada Chaduku Se Rima Soada Sine Tashin Gepa Soada Nama Dandre Wa Me Pachingi Lo. And this prayer we say once in English, once in Tibetan, we say just in English, and then we say the 100-syllable mantra. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy of wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of cyclic existence, may I free all beings. Sonandi tamche zipani, tomne nipe janun tamche shing, kegana jibanon chupai, sipe tsule doa doa sho. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. As long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world, ever absorbed in the display of divine forms and primordial awareness, appearance, sound, and perception in the state of divinities, mantras, and dharmakaya. May I, inseparable from the practice of the profound and secret great yoga, attain within the essence of mind the state of one taste. Now the mantra. Om Vajra Sattva Samaya Manubalaya Vajra Sattva Tenopa Tishtadreto Me Bhava Sudokayo Me Bhava Subokayo Me Bhava Anudakto Me Bhava Sawasidi Me Prayasa Sawakarma Sutsame Sikam Shriyam Kuruhum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sawatata Gata Vajrama Me Mansa Vajri Bhava Maha Samaya Sattva Am. Okay, so before I let you go, I just want to make a couple of announcements. First of all, in case you didn't know, we do a meditation every Saturday from 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning. Second Saturday of every month. We also have it in person at the Lakewood Library. We also gather on Zoom 3 times a month to practice the Buddha sadhana together. What else? Next Saturday, we're going to have meditation followed by the Buddha sadhana at 11. Meditation will be 10:30 to 11:30, and then the Buddha sadhana from 11:30 to 12. You will need to join that not on Zoom, but on YouTube for the Buddha sadhana because of, I'm in Zoom, but I have to lock the meeting because we got severely hacked a few months ago. So I just keep one person on here for that while we're streaming on YouTube. Then please sign up for the newsletter, links below if you haven't done that already. That's the best way to know what's happening. We haven't sent out a newsletter in probably months, but don't worry, as this one will be coming probably this week. There are new classes coming up in September, so please keep an eye out for that. And please, if you can, make a donation. That would be so helpful. Even just $5 would be great. And if you can become a member, even better. We have so many people actually. We send out these newsletters. We have like 1,200 people on our list. Typically 200, 250 will open every newsletter. If each of those people just gave $10 a month, we'd be golden. So please think about that if you can. Of course, not everybody's going to be able to do that, and we really understand. But please think about that so we can keep offering these teachings and guided meditation and retreats and classes and all the other stuff that we do. It does need money for that. So I really appreciate it. And thank you so, so much for taking time to come this morning. And you're welcome, Brian. I'm so glad that it was helpful. I know that this self-judgment during practice is a big issue for a lot of people. So that question, I'm sure, benefited others as well. So I'm really happy that we could discuss that today. And that's it. Have a great week and enjoy your life and the sunshine.